So that's the reception I get when I say that I teach television studies, but I have to say that I think television, teaching television, studying television is much more difficult than studying cinema and teaching film. And that television, I still maintain, is the most complex medium that there is, and I would include in that the internet. So I find television, teaching and studying television, a source of interest, real interest, and some difficulty. And so what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is some of the reasons for this disparity, the notion that television is banal, but at the same time my feeling that television is actually very difficult to study. I would position the beginnings of television studies as a discipline within universities, within the academy, as going back, I guess, to the early 70s, possibly. You know, it's not much before then. And it brings together, in the early period, a number of different disciplines and interests. So that we start, perhaps, with the mass communications input, which was particularly strong in the United States and spread to other countries. It is quite interesting if you go, or I've been to China twice, so if you go to China and talk to people studying television there, they very often rely on a kind of mass communications approach, which often involves the study of journalism, the study of production, the study of effects. What was the effect of television on the general population? What was the impact on democracy? Was television bad for people? And television is very much seen as a kind of mass medium, and the kind of connotations of a mass medium. Normally we think of the mass as being problematic. It means that people aren't thinking for themselves, they're going with everybody else. So mass media are often difficult things to assess. At the same time, there was also developed an interest in what I'd call the aesthetics of the medium. That's to say, what were the formal characteristics of television which made it different, perhaps, from cinema, made it different from other media. And so there was quite a lot of work in the 70s and 80s to look at what were the key characteristics of this medium, the key formal characteristics that you could perhaps call aesthetic. One of them was liveness. In the early days of television, it was live, and its purpose was to show you what was happening somewhere else at the same time as you were looking. There are a number of famous broadcasts, one of which was that there was the television image of Brooklyn Bridge on the east coast of America, and the television image of the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge, and they managed to get them into the same image. This is in the late 50s. And the television announcer was so excited, he sort of said, "We are shrinking the world. You know, you can now see from coast to coast." It was a bit of a dull image, perhaps, but it was a very exciting moment. And that notion of liveness, that you were there, you could experience what was being shown. And along with that went a direct address. You had to be told that it was live, just in case you didn't notice. So the announcer would speak to the audience and tell them, this is what we're going to see, this is what's coming up next. On the news, and we still have this, the newscaster speaks directly to you and says, this is what's happening in the world. So even though now most of television is recorded and transmitted at a different time, there is still a kind of aesthetic of liveness, of engaging you, of being there. We then also have aesthetics of mass entertainment. So that the notion that things are going to look different, that they're going to they're going to liven people up, they're going to engage people with their aesthetics. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And it's certainly mass entertainment produced by a whole range of people involved in the production. This is not authorship, as we have it in writing, as perhaps we have it in cinema with the film director as the auteur. This is mass entertainment produced on an industrial scale within a kind of factory of the television industry. The third input into the beginnings of television studies was what we call cultural studies, in particular coming from a British academics, though it spread to Europe and the States. And this was the notion of television in a context, that what was being studied was not just production, and it wasn't just the television text, what you could actually see on television, but it was how you watched television. So it looked at viewing in everyday life, the way in which the television set was fitted into the home. It looked at access and control of what was being watched in the domestic situation. And again, I'll come back to some of that in a moment. So I think we have three strands that came together at the beginnings of television studies in the 70s and 80s. Mass communications, a version of aesthetics with a particular emphasis on liveness and direct address, and a cultural studies emphasis on context and viewing situation.